Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist here with you. And want to remind everybody that this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. It does not constitute working with a licensed mental health provider. Please seek one out in your area. So today is going to be the fact that we did a trade with my guest here, which you probably will be hearing soon on their podcast, and now you're going to be able to hear them on mine. And this is actually the first exchange I've done with a fellow podcaster. So welcome to all of those who are listening for the first time, and I hope you enjoyed when I was on their podcast. So today I'm talking with Shana James, who is a coach. And for 15 years, they have coached more than 1,000 leaders, CEOs, authors, speakers, and people with big visions who step into more powerful leadership, start and grow businesses, create more effective teams, increase their impact, get promoted, find love, rekindle sparks, create a legacy, and become more personally inspired and fulfilled. With a MA in psychology, certified, and you can tell me what that means in a minute. Coach training, more than a decade of facilitating groups and workshops, starting multiple businesses and helping hundreds of entrepreneurs start their own range of. Shana's range of skills is unlike many other coaches, and especially with her work with men, which is one of her favorite topics. So, Shana, welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you for being here, and I apologize for the stumbling with your bio there.
All right. It's a little bit of an old one, so I can see that it's a little wordy. So my apologies for that.
Not a problem, but we got through it.
We did.
So, as I ask everybody, the first question is, how did you get here into all of this work and to doing all of this?
Good question. If I go all the way back, I look at my parents' relationship, which is still not a model of how I want to be in relationship, and really painful, painful to see how they relate to each other and what they call love and what they call respect, and or what they are, just not conscious of. And it looks painful there. It was painful for me. It's still painful for me. And my sister and I were talking about it yesterday. So that was the originator. Right. And then when I was in my 20s, I was studying psychology, doing my master's in psychology, and I met a whole bunch of people, and we created a conscious community, or an intentional community, where we decided we were going to authentically relate to each other, or we called it soul to soul. We were going to have these, soul depth relating, and we were going to stay around if we made messes and not just bail, And so we made a lot of messes, and we had these really beautiful learnings and growings. And two of the men started a course where they brought in us women, the women who are part of the community, as a team of women to give men loving and honest feedback. And so it was beautiful. It changed my life, and really opened me to see the best in men and to see behind the masks and the facades. And so I work with people of all genders, but I've tended to work in a lot in the heterosexual dynamic, because I'm a woman. And when I work with men, it's like men often come to me, with questions around their relationships with women. But for me, it goes deeper than that. Like, it's very, it's about humanity and sovereignty and connection and intimacy. And so that's really the work that I love to do.
Lovely. And you have a book too, which is The Honest Sex.
Yes,
can you give us a little snippet of that?
Yeah. Honest Sex is about, what keeps connection and intimacy alive. And that a lot of people what I found in my training and doing, some tantra training and other kinds of pleasure and sexuality, sensuality trainings is that I didn't feel like people really had an honest definition of what sex is. It's much more expansive to me than most of us are taught. And then I also started realizing when I looked again back in my parents' relationship that our way of being honest with each other, I feel could use an upgrade. And so it was like, how do we look at what is a kind of honesty that actually creates connection instead of a more, well, I'm just saying it like it is, like I'm just being honest. But that you can't separate, right? You can't separate that kind of what I call immature honesty, which I don't mean it as a judgment, but it's not as evolved or it's not taking responsibility. And you can't separate that from somebody's sex life or intimacy fading
Right.
because they're all connected. So,
Right.
the first part of the book explores what honesty is and how to mature that. The next part is what is sex actually. And then the third part is more how to connect and create intimacy in some practices.
Which is very much an issue we struggle with, not just depending on the culture you come from and what is fed that idea of masculinity, let alone relationship, but just does it fit the circumstances of the now versus 50, 100 years ago, 200 years ago?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so much, I think people are wanting so much more from partnership these days, which I think is amazing. I think I see relationship and partnership as a growth path or a spiritual path, depending on your lens and how how you see life. And I don't think it used to be that, it used to be
Right.
financial, family, right? Those kinds of,
So almost business contract-ish.
exactly. So while I don't think I don't think we can get everything from one person. I do think that we can have a kind of intimacy and connection that many people don't even realize is possible. I've led authentic relating games nights and workshops where people have said that they've, spent 2 hours doing these games and connecting with people, and they feel more connected than they have with their friends or family that they've been known for decades. So there's a lot more possible, I think, than people realize because we're not taught about intimacy and emotional availability and, what it's like to stay present with each other.
Very true. And which again, I would say is like some of our cultural expectations and even the aspects of something else I was recently listening to talking about the idea of people who immigrate from another part of the world and then having to deal with what are the cultural norms and
Right.
expectations in the
Here.
place that they come to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which can
Right.
be very counter, which can be very different, which can also have a very different set of around what is that emotional connection that's allowed.
Totally. And some people go right to cultures where there's more expression or less expression, or right. That can be really interesting if you have people in romantic relationships who are from different cultures and or different family cultures too. Some people's families were loud and expressive and or sarcastic, and other people's were much more contained. I have a clients who are a couple, and one person's family was very expressive and very loud and very dynamic, and the other person's family was much more tucked in. And, that's a dynamic that they have to navigate together.
But I'm sure also in its own way was appealing to bring them together
Right.
in some way,
We're
which he didn't
drawn
realize.
to. Yeah.
Yeah, didn't realize it, and now needs to find where there's a medium between that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, alone the idea that they can actually create a medium.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we'll see, right? I think that it depends on everybody's willingness and sense of responsibility, right? And a sense of where we want to stretch and how generous we are, right? With differences. Like, can we actually experience differences with a partner and know that they can create something beautiful? Or are those differences too far apart? And we just realize, oh, this is not it's not a fit.
Mm-hmm. Which I think is also, and going back to that, even to that standpoint of what we were saying about the sort of almost monetary arrangements that had to go in there. The idea that dissolving a relationship is also got purpose and got
Yeah.
function and is actually sometimes actually more necessary than bringing this couple together.
Right. Right. I mean, I'm divorced. I was divorced almost 12 years ago. And my ex, who now we co-parent, our
Mm-hmm.
12, almost 13-year-old together. And we moved states together and we have family, right? Like we are a family still and we've transitioned. And so that's something else that sometimes I help people do is instead of seeing it as a breakup or a failure, that we
Mm-hmm.
can transition dynamics and we do well together. He just went out for a beer with my partner recently and
Mm-hmm.
we can create that, but it takes again a kind of maturity, right? Of being able to not blame or shame or attack our
Mm-hmm.
partners or ex-partners,
Mm-hmm.
but to do our best to be loving and open and receptive, as long as there's no right abuse present or some
Right.
some kind of safety that we need to create for ourselves.
And is in your work with men, has that been something that's come up a lot? Or is like what's sort of the proportionality you see with the various stories that men bring you?
About separating or dissolving relationships.
Separating, dissolving, the reasons for it,
Yeah,
the reasons that even are bringing them together.
that's a great question. I mean, there are many men who come to me in struggles with their partners and realize that their partners aren't willing to meet them.
Mm-hmm.
So they come to me as the one in the partner who is wanting more connection, wanting more intimacy, wanting more sensuality, and their partner is in some way either blocked, whether it's from past trauma or whether it's just the shared history.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes this man has been the kind of man who, maybe not the kind of man is not the right way to say it, has had the life experience where he's not been taught to be
Mm-hmm.
emotional or connected. And so he's been a provider, right? He's been very amazing at taking care of the family, but hasn't been emotionally connected. And so sometimes women in this heterosexual dynamic can shut down and feel alone and then feel resentful. And then it's like, right, trying to, and sometimes I've seen that these partners have been like, I'm done. I'm not willing. I'm not willing to come back
Mm-hmm.
or open up, right? You weren't here for me before. So I'm not going to open. And
Mm-hmm.
then the men who come to me have to make a decision like, okay, if they're with a partner who isn't willing to open, is that the partnership they want? And can they do, my stance is, all right, let's see how you can do everything you can to lovingly invite someone to connect with you. No blaming, no shaming, no attacking, like I said, but can you inspire and invite someone?
Mm-hmm.
And, if you try that for a while and someone really is unwilling to come closer, then we have to look at, all right, is this a healthy relationship?
Which I think also brings the aspect, like you said, the experiences. Can you even articulate
Right.
that concept of what that means too?
Yeah.
Because I know when I work with couples, one of the biggest things I usually always start with is, are your definitions even close enough to being the
Mm.
same, to know that you're talking the same
The
language
definitions
or
of
not?
what relationship is or what they want out of a relationship or what love is or
Yeah, I mean, even if I'll start with the word like safety or intimacy. How do you
yeah.
describe it? Does it
Yes.
seem more physical? Does it seem more mental, emotional? Does it seem more
Beautiful.
spiritual?
Yep.
And then it's like, okay, notice you two are talking about something. You're
Very
using the
different.
same word, but you're using entirely different definitions.
Such
Are
a good
you?
point.
Does that not surprise you that you're having these cross talks?
Yes.
So
Yes.
let's try and find. And even then, when it turns out is actually um, they're talking about trust, but the definition that they're giving actually better fits vulnerability. And so it's like,
Mm.
okay, so your definition about vulnerability actually matches their definition of trust. So let's consider switching where these definitions are going.
Wow. Yep. Like switching so they can try on each other's definitions.
Well, if one's talking about trust and the other one's talking about vulnerability, but
Yeah.
their definitions are swapped,
Uh-huh.
does the word or the definition need to be swapped in the conversation?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Or understood, just understood by the other
Mhm.
person. Oh, that's what you mean by that. Oh, that's what I mean by that. Right. That kind of shared reality of we may not agree, but we actually understand what the other one means by
Mhm.
what they're saying.
And they're using a different, just again, different phrasing to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's one of the big ones I find. But I also consider too, how often are men not encouraged to have that awareness?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did a TEDx talk called "What a Thousand Men's Tears Reveal" about the crisis between men and women.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think that's a huge part of it is that men have not been encouraged to be honest or vulnerable or open. I actually just got a text this morning. It was a client of mine wished me a happy birthday. My birthday was yesterday. And then
Happy
I
belated
said,
birthday.
thank you. And I said, how are things going? And he was like, so good. He said, thank you so much for guiding me to be vulnerable because um, he said, I opened up with this woman. He hasn't really dated much. He's in his 20s and
Mm-hmm.
hasn't really dated much and is just starting. And I taught a course called Effortless, where I taught much more
Mm-hmm.
about like, okay, how do you be real and how do you be honest and how do you be open and vulnerable? And
Mm-hmm.
what does it take inside to not feel like that makes you weak or that makes
Mm-hmm.
you, unmanly or something? And so the text I received back was, thank you so much. And I'm being vulnerable. And this woman is amazing. And, as I got vulnerable with her, she opened up to me. And now we're having this, real
Mm-hmm.
amazing relationship. And I definitely had tears come to my eyes because I felt like, that's what I want for all people is that we get to open up and be vulnerable. And then someone meets us there and says, oh, thank you. Thank you for letting me know that. And here's where I'm vulnerable too. And we don't put each other in boxes. We don't think, oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, if a man is vulnerable, that means he's weak. It's like, no,
Mm-hmm.
actually, it's a part of all of us. It's a part of being human. And so we can be vulnerable and we can also be strong and vulnerability can be strength. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which again comes back to what definitions are being normalized and
Uh-huh.
encouraged around that sense of vulnerability. Because I know one of the
Yeah.
ones I've also talked with some of my male clients is when did the idea of tough become synonymous with invulnerable?
Right. Right. And when did the idea of vulnerable become synonymous with weak? Right. Like
Mm-hmm.
same, opposite side of the same coin, I think. Yeah, it's a great question. And who implanted that idea? Where did it
Mm-hmm.
come from? And then, okay, just because it's an idea in your head, does that mean you have to follow it or live by that? What would it take to actually let that go and be free to be yourself?
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Which kind of leads to something we were talking about just at the beginning about kind of this, in some cases, almost, I don't want to call it I don't want to, double standards closest way I can describe it, but I don't think it's really the most appropriate way
Yeah.
of describing it. Because something that I've sort of encountered, especially with colleagues, is that for many of us, there are things that we just can't work with because of our own personal wounds. And yet, when I've expressed some of those personal wounds and why I can't work with certain clients, or why these clients aren't a good fit for me,
Mm-hmm.
I'm told you should work with it anyway. When I can't say the same thing to, say, certain women about some of the stuff they're working on or won't work on
Yeah.
with
Well,
these
it's so
clients.
interesting too, because to me, I'm like, well, if anyone tells me I should do something, I feel suspicious, right? There's a part of me that's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, well, I would like to be curious about that. Like, what do you mean should and for whose benefit and like what's really going on there? Like, are there
Mm-hmm.
shoulds? Are there shoulds, things we should do? Maybe we should be respectful or we should, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should know ourselves or things like that. But right, that is
And
interesting. I mean, I think part of your point is the double standard and then also
mm-hmm.
like who is telling us what
Mm-hmm.
to do and how are they telling us
Mm-hmm.
to do it, right?
Mm-hmm. And equally the perception that, oh, someone may be connecting, but is actually a connection, or is it just, the facade?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And how do you know, right? How do you know
Mm-hmm.
if it's the facade? And I think, yeah, I'm curious how you feel that, or if that came up in this person who's telling you what you should do. Like, is it a person you trust and respect and you can go deep with and get curious about all of that with, or is it someone who, is just clear about their ideas and what's right and what's wrong? And
At this point, and I'll say this right now, that I've lost my trust in this person.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes a lot of sense, right? If someone's telling you you should do something and your inner wisdom or your inner guidance or inner
Or the
sense of what makes
boundaries.
you feel safe or your
Mm-hmm.
boundaries is actually, this doesn't feel right to me. I
Mm-hmm.
can imagine losing trust in somebody else.
Mm-hmm. And I will one consider that that's probably going to run for a lot of men. And
Yeah.
they've been hit with a lot of that, both generally from societal, but also from the people that they are supposed to be seeing as their loved ones.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I know. I've been in relationships and dynamics with men who've said, I've never cried with a woman um who has been loving with me
Mm-hmm.
after I cried, right? Like women have been disgusted, women have been shaming, women have pulled away.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that there's a lot of work to do for all of us to welcome a man's vulnerability and to get curious about it and to explore, as I led these workshops and was on this team of facilitators
Mm-hmm.
and got to see men, part of what I saw was as I welcomed the vulnerability and I lovingly held space and didn't, go to disgust or shame or blame, which took me, some time to work through my own
Mm-hmm.
baggage and my own trauma. Um, these men, and I guess we've got a definition question here, I'm noting,
Mm-hmm.
but to me, the men felt stronger. And that's the definition by stronger. What I mean is
Mm-hmm.
um, more sovereign, more grounded, more able
Mm-hmm.
to affirm themselves and love
Mm-hmm.
themselves. Um, whereas I think the fear is, okay, well, if we welcome men's vulnerability, they're going to turn into puddles. They're not going to be
Mm-hmm.
strong. They're not going to be the rock. They're not. I think, especially in a heterosexual dynamic, I think women have a fear that they're not going to have the rock that they have counted on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we need to get a little more fluid with our definitions because I think, rocks need to be porous, right? At
Oh,
times.
and rocks can be porous. I mean,
Right.
really, the only thing in nature that is hard 24/7 is basically rock or
Yeah.
minerals.
Yeah.
And even some of them can be porous. I mean, just look at volcanic rock.
Right. Right. And they can be, oops, sorry, they can be, shaped by
Mm-hmm.
water and right. They're not invincible or invulnerable.
Mm-hmm. But the notion that the automatic flip has to be something going towards feminine is also part of this entire problem.
I
The
think so
flip of
too.
many, yeah, the flip of many things doesn't go into a sexual binary. It just goes into what is the opposite? Like the standpoint of the opposite of all emotions is numbness,
Yeah.
because all the emotions are energy.
Yeah.
The lack of energy, numbness, is the real opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting, the whole feminine, masculine. And when I first started, I did a lot of, polarity and
Mm-hmm.
it didn't necessarily have to be man, woman, but still, we all have internal feminine, masculine, we could say. But I'm also at some point started looking at that language and how that can even um, have us feel constrained, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes to just say, okay, the person who wants to lead or the person who wants to follow or right, just different ways of saying things to take it out of the feminine masculine, I think can be helpful at times.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a great place for us to take a break. So stay tuned here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Shana James, coach, therapist, author, and we'll be right back to continue this talk. So stay tuned, folks.
Follow Voice America at facebook.com/Voice America for juicy updates from your favorite radio shows and podcasts.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information.
Become a member of VoiceAmerica.com. It's easy, and best of all, it's free. Start out by going to our homepage or any of our channels and click register at the top. Once you've created an account and signed in, you can create your own custom library, opt into our newsletter, search by show, host, guest, or topic of interest, or browse millions of hours of content across all of our Voice America radio channels. Membership gets you more. Visit VoiceAmerica.com today to get started and tailor the listening experience to your taste.
Follow us on Twitter for more great ideas at Voice America Empowerment.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello, all. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Shana James, who is, and correction from earlier, not a therapist, but a coach, as well as an author and just facilitator around working with men. So we were just sort of checking in during the break, and something that had come up, I know for me, I was at a training a while ago, and this especially going with African American culture. This other Black therapist stood up and she was talking about supporting the strength and being more supportive to the men in her life and so forth. But she was always wondering why the men weren't stepping up to doing more, and that she was bearing the weight of it. And full respect to the Black sisters out there. And I was sitting with it, and it was after the event, and I realized you've forgotten our history.
Mm-hmm.
And the history being that if a Black man stood up for any of the things mostly that some of the women have been able to stand up for, they ended up dead.
Yes.
Which then meant, how long are they actually still present in your relationship?
Right.
There is a weighing choice going on every second for these men. Is this the moment where I stand up for something and I don't get to come home?
Yeah.
I don't get to come home. I don't get to see my kids make it into their adulthood, or seeing my grandkids. I don't get the chance to spend the time with my partner. And even then, if I'm dead, and you're talking about protection, I'm not there to help try and protect you.
Right.
And you're at the mercy of somebody else, and possibly even the people. And so there becomes almost the unwinnable situation, or unwinnable no-win situation, just for a Black man to be able to decide, when is he standing forward, when is he not, and the image that goes with that.
Well, and then what strikes me, because that's so real, right? And it's in our DNA, and it's how you're raised, and, you know, your parents and their parents, and there's examples, and there's stories, and there's the reality of how the world is today still, right?
Mm-hmm.
What gives me hope, or where I, feel my heart open, is how I think romantic relationship can be a place to create a kind of safety where, we can stand up and be honest with each other in a loving way.
Mm-hmm.
and be that, right, that support for each other. However, many of us were not taught how to do that, right? We weren't taught
Mm-hmm.
how to hold someone else's vulnerability without kind of crumbling or defending or, being incredibly afraid that this is who they are and they're not going to come back, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I do feel the hopefulness of that, the partnership being a place where we can love and support each other's wholeness and
Mm-hmm.
expression, and also not hopelessness, but the sadness that most of us were not taught how to do that.
Which also makes them wonder, going back to that, one of the other things that we deal with in struggle of mental health is there's a perception of there is this perfect functional family out there. And it's like, can we, where? And it's not a sitcom. Where is this one? Because it's like, can we actually stop and take a look at what they're doing? Because that's what we're supposed to be doing out here, as opposed to
Yeah.
this mythic family that exists, or this mythic male.
I love hearing you say that because, I often think, oh, well, I am a single mom. I'm a Jewish single mom, with a kid who's trans. And like we do not have a family that looks like that mythic family. And so there are moments where I feel wrong or I feel
Mm-hmm.
like, we should be some other way. I failed somehow. So it gives me a moment to just pause and reflect on that as you say that and the pain of it. And also, I love hearing you say, oh, that doesn't exist, right? It's a good reminder for me and the parts that think it exists somewhere still out there.
Mm-hmm. Or even if it is, it's again a facade. And just pay attention to Instagram or TikTok for a bit. It's like, yeah, those are all curated, picked out shots.
Yeah.
What's going on outside the frame of that camera?
Right.
What's going on
Right.
behind that camera?
Right. Yes. Yes. I had to remember recently being with a family where, they were talking about their travels and their summer and all this stuff. And then I realized, like, oh, right, they're struggling to know if they're going to stay in a relationship together. Their kids are struggling with certain things. And from the outside, it looks, really beautiful. And
Mm-hmm.
we've all got our struggles and nobody's perfect and there's no perfect partner. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
feel.
And yet there's so much that is fed into that. And again, going back to the idea that there's a
Yeah.
perfect man.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. No perfect man, no perfect human. Um, it reminds me of how I like to shift the definition of confidence from like, oh, I know how to do, I know how to
Mm-hmm.
do everything to, oh, I trust myself. I trust myself to roll with what comes my way,
Mm-hmm.
with a kind of, I'm going to meet it with presence. I'm going to meet it with kindness or care if there's another person involved.
Mm-hmm.
And not like I still want to use the word perfect man or perfect human, but what if perfect was,
Mm-hmm.
something similar to that? Like I'm going to be kind to myself and loving to myself and others, and I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm going to show up, right? Like I think if I saw an example of my parents actually showing up with each other when one of them was struggling and the other was there for the other person, or helping them talk it through, or maybe saying like, hey, this is a little beyond my scope. I
Mm-hmm.
think you should see a therapist for this part. Or, hey, we have a dynamic that isn't quite working here. And it
Mm-hmm.
seems like we're both struggling with this, and this is painful for both of us. So maybe um, we should get some help with this, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
just so different from the combative, not on the same team kind of relationships.
Mm-hmm. Which also then makes me wonder, I mean, just because, again, we see a lot of this in media and so forth, how much have been I want to put this in the most polite way, the places where we've got people who have definitely personality disorders
Right.
and
Right.
then find themselves in power as setting a definition for the world needs to match them.
Right. So painful.
And that aspect of why have we let that become the defining aspect of what we're doing and moving around in the world
That's a
versus
great
that's actually
question.
what we want to be the opposite of.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it's as you say that, what I notice in myself is like, whoa, it feels like this tidal wave of, okay, why have we let that happen? Or what has caused us um, to allow that?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I think, oh, well, right, if we're not given healthy examples in our homes growing up or in our
Mm-hmm.
communities, then we don't know what healthy looks like. And then I think we're much more likely to be skewed and manipulated and to think that that's the way it should be again, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or even one of the classic ones is the idea of found family when the family of origin, the blood family, is dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And yet between the two, the found family is being more functional and getting
Right.
what's needed. But yet, no, we cherish the blood one as opposed to also looking at how it can malfunction. And it is capable of malfunctioning.
Yeah.
And this is also, again, the places where our culture and our experience as men is becoming up at.
Right. Right. Yeah, right. And we're taught that we should be loyal to our blood family,
Mm-hmm.
even if that dysfunction is creating a lot of pain or stress or trauma.
Mm-hmm. And I also like to think is like the intentional relationship is actually way more important because again, that blood family couldn't have started without that intentional choice
The intentional choice to
ideally mate and procreate.
uh-huh. Well, right. And was it intentional or did it right? How
Yeah.
conscious was it?
Yeah. But still there was an intention that caused this next new being to be here as opposed to, well, we get into that messiness when we start talking at it in the other direction.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot of pain, a lot of history. It's not just families, but
Mm-hmm.
whole cultures, right?
Mm-hmm.
Slavery and like it's really mind-boggling. I mean, I guess when you look at history and culture, it makes sense as to why humans don't have a sense of how to take care of ourselves or how to love ourselves or respect ourselves because culturally we're not given many of those examples either.
Mm-hmm. Or we got the romanticized ones.
Yes. Right. And we get the romanticized ones. And then we feel even more messed up because that's not happening for us. So we make ourselves wrong. Oh, so maybe that way was the right way as opposed to, oh, there might be another path, like the middle way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like how many of those Greek myths are made great melodrama, but not exactly good family role models?
No. Yeah. Right. I've just been listening to a lot of those with my kid over the past many years. And yeah, sons killing their fathers and just, right, horrible family dynamics, eating each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which then again comes that question is, are we surprised we're having these issues and
Right.
men are struggling with this?
Right. Maybe I should be less surprised.
And again, that's what sometimes we have to look at. What is the media diet?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the media diet then versus, well, it's still very similar to what we have right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are we taking in and what are we seeing? And to be conscious of the fact that we are being shaped or molded versus this is just the way it is, right? This is what's right. I've got some clients I've worked with who were raised Mormon, or my partner was raised Mormon, and then at some point, not to say Mormonism is wrong, but at some point these people in particular, started to look and question and see, and this happens with a lot of religions, any especially extreme, like, Hasidic Catholicism, like, right, where there's a sense of, oh, wait, how do I think for myself, or how do I process what I'm being told versus what feels true to me?
And all of that's in the choices that many people, many women, many men, many humans are struggling with.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is why you and I do what we do, right? We're attempting, I think, to support people to know themselves, love themselves, to be able to create relationship dynamics. At least this is how I see it, but I don't know how you see it, but create connections, relationships from a place of inner sovereignty and the capacity to, care for, respect, and be curious about others.
Very much so. Which I think too leads into, because I think we talked on your show about grief and grieving and losing, and the way that endings can also happen with that same level of respect, and does not have to be destructive. Like I said earlier, it's like the person who has now crossed a boundary with me, I've lost respect for, and I'm trying to figure out how to step away in a respectful manner, but also it's like, do you understand the consequence and the impact of what you've done?
Right.
And
are they willing to hear that? And can we say it respectfully? Like you said, even though you've lost respect, right? Can you still respectfully communicate? And then we get to see, how do they respond? Do they respond kindly and with respect, right? Or do they stay on their soapbox of, this is how it should be?
Or do they quickly ask for forgiveness without really, again, understanding what they've done?
Yeah.
Because they don't want to deal with the discomfort or the inconvenience, versus you have not learned the lesson.
Right. Right. And then, like, I think about, a romantic relationship with our partners. What is our role in our partners learning these lessons? Right? And how do we invite them into learning as much as possible, as opposed to trying to demand that our partner, your situation is a little different, right? But I don't think demanding tends to work in any situation, but especially in a romantic relationship, right? I think people can often try to demand things of each other. And that, to me, works less well than the invitation and the vulnerability and the, like, but also feels like a vulnerability and standing up for oneself. Like, hey, I actually need this. I need to talk about this for us to, for us to stay in this together, or for me to actually open my heart to you, right? But there's a way that it can be easy to be defensive, or to be combative,
or even static.
Stonewall.
Yeah. And then the standpoint that the relationship is going to grow, which means, there's many ways you can grow together, but there's also that potential for you to grow apart.
Yeah.
So, or that you're not going to stay in this static place the entire time. So I think that's a great place for us to go ahead and call the show here for today. Where can folks find you if they want to read more about your book, work with some of their coaching, and come to some of your lectures?
Yeah.
Especially your TED Talk.
Oh, yeah. My website. So it's shanajamescoaching.com, and Shana is SHANA. If you do that and then /TEDx, you will see my TED Talk, my TEDx talk. And there my podcast, Man Alive, that Perry's episode is on. You can find that on the podcast tab. The book is on the book tab, and you can get a free chapter. Chapter 6 is What is Sex Actually? So if you go to the book page and enter your name and email, you can get that chapter and see if the rest of the book feels like it would be a fit for you.
Excellent. I want to thank you again for coming on and doing this exchange. And I hope there'll be more ones out there in the future, to say that to podcast land. But stay tuned, and we'll have more stuff coming up on the podcast, but also take some of these things to heart, and just, it's okay to look at your relationship and do these assessments, because we need to.
Yeah.
So, till the future, folks.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.